guys, it's Brandon with Extreme Daily Drivers, and we are always balling on a budget and wrenching our garage. Got a really good one for you today. Today we are going to talk about the bouncing idle or hunting idle that happens on any Honda or Acura car that you may have. So if you got an Integra, a CRX, a Civic, an NSX, whatever you got, watch this video, maybe you'll learn something. So I started my day off today by watching some YouTube videos, and one of the guys that I started following recently is this guy. His name is Mark over at Honda Street Garage. Click the link below. Make sure you're following him if you have a Honda or Acura or think about getting one in the future. This guy has forgotten more about Hondas and Acuras than you and I will ever know. So anyway, his recent video is about trouble you may have when you do an engine swap, and he briefly touched on the fact that you may have a bouncing idle or a surging idle or hunting idle, whatever you want to call it. And this is something that I've wanted to do for a while. I've wanted to make a video on this because when I finally put my engine back in my Prelude, I had this problem. It took me a day or so to figure out. So I wanted to kind of go through step by step on where to begin if you have this issue and how to fix it. So I want to start this off by saying these steps are not something that I invented. This is basic troubleshooting if you're a mechanic or somebody who knows a lot more about cars than I do. Most of these steps, if not all of them, I got from a website that I found doing Google searches on bouncing idles for Hondas. And I came across this guy, Eric the Car Guy. I already follow him on YouTube, and he did make a video about this, so you can search and watch that. He goes into more in depth as to what these things actually do and why they cause the bouncing idle that I'm going to go into. So basically what I'm doing is going through the steps that he recommended, as well as others, as well as some friends of mine who've been trying to help me when I had this bouncing idle problem. So these aren't my steps. They are proven steps on how to fix this issue. So let's start at the top and work our way to the bottom. So if you have a Honda or Acura and you have a bouncing idle, the first place you want to start is right here at the radiator. You want to make sure that your radiator cooling system is bled properly and that there's no air in the radiator or in the hoses or in the engine. So real quick, I'm going to give you a brief summary of how you bleed your cooling system. There are a million YouTube videos on YouTube on how to do this, so I don't want to get in crazy detail, but it's pretty straightforward. Pop the cap off of here, loosen the bleeder valve, fill this up to its capacity. Once it starts to drip out of here, crank this over tight, turn the car on, turn the heat on, let the car run for about 15-20 minutes. Your fan will come on twice. Continue to fill this up, and then what I do, and I don't know if it's right or not, but I crank this guy loose. The stream should be pretty strong pouring out of here. Once I know it's strong and not dripping, crank that tight, fill this all the way up, turn the car off, it's bled. So that's step one, bleed your cooling system. Now we're going to go to step two, which is your IACV valve. All right, so your IACV valve on this Prelude is right here, attached to the intake, has an electrical connection right here. And basically what this thing does is it senses the air coming in from your intake to your throttle body and into the intake, and it's telling the computer to either speed up or slow down the air to fuel ratio or something like that. I don't know. It's basically witchcraft. So anyway, if this thing gets jacked up, it can cause your idle to fluctuate. So you can actually clean the IACV valve. Here is a used one. As you can see here, it's pretty beat up, but see that little screen right there? This one's actually been cleaned. I cleaned this one because initially I thought my bouncing idle was a result of this. It wasn't. So anyway, I got this guy out of a junkyard. I gave it a good cleaning. I installed it. I took the one off that was on there, installed this guy, had the same problem. So this is what a clean one looks like. So as you can see, there is a pretty significant difference between these screens. Even though I cleaned this guy is much cleaner. Okay, so you might want to start with this after you've gone ahead and gone through your cooling system and you know that you don't have any air in it. One last little thing on these IACV valves, and you can do this if you want. You don't have to do this, but I did it because less hoses in the car is a cleaner look, and it's also less things go wrong. You can, bear with me, ta-da! You can remove this. Okay, so from what I've been told, if you live in a cold environment, this is necessary. Coolant runs through this, and it prevents this from freezing up or some crap like that. I don't know. Take it off. It's ugly. It's more hoses in the car. I don't know. If you're like me, you remove it. Okay, moving on to number 3, we are going to search for vacuum leaks. All right, so when it comes to looking for vacuum leaks, don't be an idiot like I was and think that it can only come from vacuum lines, because vacuum leaks can kind of come from anywhere. Anywhere there's a metal surface meeting another metal surface, there needs to be a gasket. So the gaskets can leak just as easily as these lines can. So don't just think it's going to be a vacuum line. So as you're going through your engine searching for your leak, keep in mind how this engine works, right? So air is going to come in through the intake, it's going to come into the throttle body, it's going to go into the intake, again, that is connected to the engine or the head, right? Where it's coming in and the air is getting mixed with fuel and it's getting mixed and it's getting compressed and blah, 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 blowing out the exhaust, right? So we know how that works. So we want to start here, right? So just, you want to make sure your couplings are tight on your intake if you have several like I do, because this thing's hacked up by me and pieced together. All right, so then we're going to move to the throttle body. You see I got some rubber nipples on here blocking off some of these vacuum lines. You want to make sure that you've done that. Here, you got some more here. If I pull one of these out, we're going to have a surging idle, guaranteed. And this one's going to my map sensor, so it has to stay in, and that's the hole it goes into. You also want to make sure, if you've messed with your engine like I have, that your map sensor is in the proper hole and not over here, or here, or where it's not supposed to be. You got your PCV hose here, make sure there's not a hole in that. And then we're going to actually just start getting into gaskets. So I got a gasket here between the throttle body and the intake, make sure that all the bolts here are nice and tight. Then we're going to go and make sure that our IACV is nice and tight up against the intake, and make sure that little rubber gasket that's in there is good and tight. You're going to make sure that, as we go to the other side, you're going to make sure that your brake booster hose is good. All right, so this could have a hole in it, even though it's going to the brake booster here. If this has a hole in it, it could easily create a surging idle. Here you see I got another blocked off port here. So these are the things you want to check. Another one here, forget what this thing's called, but it's useless. But anyway, got another one on top of there. So those are the things you want to check as far as vacuum lines. And then when it starts to get to the point where, hey, those are all good, now we're going to start looking at gaskets. So there's a gasket right here. You can kind of see it hanging out. I actually hit that up with some gasket sealer. But there is a gasket between the throttle, or the intake split into two pieces. So there's a gasket between there. And there's a gasket between the head and the intake. And that was my problem. So take a look at this picture. So as you guys can see in that picture, my gasket, it got folded into one of the intake runners. You can see there's a little damage there from where it happened. I was going to reuse this, but I decided not to, just order a new gasket. So yeah, so the gasket got folded over into one of those intake runners, and boom, there's my surging idle problem. One of the reasons that made this so hard to find and made my problem so hard to find was that I wasn't taking a proper approach to solving a problem. I put the engine together new. I used all new parts, including this was brand new when I installed it. So a surging idle problem was more difficult to diagnose because I was just taking the wrong approach. I was like, it doesn't make sense. Everything's new. It's all new vacuum lines. It's all new gaskets. Why doesn't it work? Oh my God, it's crazy. Well, it's not crazy, okay? It's actually extremely simple. You have a surging idle because air is getting into the system that's not supposed to be there. It's leaking in. It's somehow escaping or coming in, or whatever you want to call it. So all you have to do is use a process of elimination to figure out what the hell the problem is. And vacuum leaks, again, can come from anywhere, especially gaskets, which I learned out the hard way. So anyway, that's number 3, search for vacuum leaks. Okay, so now that we've kind of hit the big 3, right? The cooling system's number 1, also really the easiest one to kind of troubleshoot. Never hurts to bleed your cooling system. It's also like free. And number 2, the IACV valve. This guy, right? And number 3 would be the vacuum leaks. That's the hardest one in my opinion because you just don't know where they're coming from. They could come from anywhere. So now we're kind of on to number 4, which for me I would compound as the PCV valve and the fast idle valve. So let's go and take a look at those. All right, so here's the PCV valve. These things are incredibly inexpensive. I've read some places where everybody recommends a Honda one. They say some of these aftermarket ones like a Bosch or Purolite or something like that, they're no good, but I've never had any issues with some aftermarket PCV valves. They're like $4 at AutoZone or whatever. But anyway, this guy allows air to come and go through it through basically vacuum. I don't know exactly how all this stuff works. Go watch another video if you want really technical stuff. But I know if this fails, you'll have vacuum leaks. So one of the way it can fail is if it's not seated properly down inside your valve cover. There is a little rubber gasket that goes around the this hole here, and this guy sits firmly, tightly kind of in place. It almost snaps into place. So if it's not pushed down all the way, it can cause extra air to get into your intake, which can cause a bouncing idle. Another way that you can get a bouncing idle is if there's a hole right here in the tube between the intake and the valve. So that's another thing to check. All right, so the second part of this is the fast idle valve, and let's take a look. Oh wait, it's not here. Oh my God, where'd your fast idle valve go? Yeah, I took that crap out because you don't need it. That's where it went. There's supposed to be a fast idle valve here. What it does, I guess, is an initial startup, it basically speeds your idle up. And then it's supposed to kind of disengage, I'm guessing, once the car's warmed up. Again, I think this is for cold weather climates or whatever. Done a lot of reading on the fast idle valve, and it's basically useless, and everyone's car runs better when they delete it. The way it works is there is a little cap on top of it, very similar to this guy, where you're going to take the screws off and look inside, and there's going to be kind of like a plastic washer inside. That plastic washer, you can tighten it down, and that will allegedly get rid of any kind of vacuum leak that may be coming through there. So you can do that, or you can just delete it like I did and just get yourself a nice block-off plate, and you'll be good to go. Okay, so if you've done everything that I've recommended so far and you still are having idle issues, there are other things that possibly can be causing your idle issue. One of them being you may have to adjust your valves. I don't know if that's true or not. I read that. It's possible. You might want to try it if you've never adjusted your valves. It's not really that hard to do. It does take some concentration. I'm not going to go over it in this video. You might want to try that. Another thing that you might want to do is check the timing on your car. So this is a little difficult to do when the car is surging. That was definitely my experience. So I'm not going to go over exactly how you basically set your ignition timing on your car, but there are a million videos that show you how to do it, and it's something to consider. Another thing to possibly consider is that your timing belt could be off a tooth. This is definitely a possibility if it's running rough, if you're just noticing that it's not only a surge, but it just doesn't look right, it doesn't sound right. Definitely check that your timing belt is dead on the way it's supposed to be. In other words, it's lined up on the flywheel, the cams are lined up, your crank is lined up. I mean, everything's got to be perfect for your timing, so for your timing belt. So definitely check that. So lastly, what you can do is you can go ahead and mess with your idle. So the way that you do it on this car is, here, let me show you. All right, so I don't have the manual in front of me. Obviously, it's in the manual. It's all over the internet. It's probably on YouTube too, so here's another version of it. So for this car, what you have to do is you have to find this little guy right here. So I think that basically every Honda is going to have one of these little guys. And of course, it's impossible to do with one hand. So, pop this little hood off here. Come on, these SOB. There we go. Alright, so you're going to see two pins in there. And what you're going to do is you're going to get yourself a paper clip and you're going to jump it from one to the other. So basically you're looping this connection. Then you're going to start the car and let the car idle. So once the car warms up and is idling, you're going to go ahead and pop this guy right here. The connection to your IACV. So with the harness jumped with the paper clip, and the IACV disconnected, you are then going to come over to your throttle body, and you see in here, you see that guy? There's a little flathead screw in there. So you put your screwdriver in there, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Now if you go righty-tighty, what you're doing is you're allowing less air in through this screw, which is going to lower your RPMs. If you go lefty-loosey, you are going to let in more air, which is going to raise your RPMs. So depending on what's going on with your car, you may have to tighten this screw or loosen this screw. Whatever you do, it should be very minimal, like a quarter of a turn. So don't think you're going to be turning this thing 1,000 times. It is a very small adjustment, and quite frankly, you shouldn't ever really have to get to this point. Your surging idle issue is probably one of the things we've already talked about. But if you have to set your idle, this is how you do it. And once you find that this thing evens out and starts to run right, you're going to go ahead and reconnect the connection on your IACV. You are going to pull your paper clip out of there, and then you're going to go inside your fuse box, and you're going to pull the clock fuse on a 91 Prelude anyway. And what that's going to do is going to reset the ECU. Then you're going to wait 10 seconds, reinsert the clock fuse, and start the car up. So anyway guys, those are the culprits that will cause a bouncing idle or a hunting idle or a surging idle or your car just to idle like crap. I hope you learned something today. Once again, shout out to Eric Car Guy, also my friends who helped me through this, Bobby Diaz, aka the Wizard, my friend Brett. These guys helped me kind of through Facebook, over the phone, sort of helped me figure this out, because basically I was being really stubborn and not believing that I could have possibly installed a gasket incorrectly. But anyway, I hope you learned something today. I hope this is a helpful video and becomes part of your collection of resources. Whenever you have an issue with your car, don't hesitate to take advantage of the resources you have. So, you know, use Google, use Facebook pages, use forums, use don't be afraid to use this. Use the manual, use YouTube, right? Use your resources to your best ability. It might not answer every question, but it may give you a road to go down. So I hope that's helpful. And thanks so much for watching. And hit that like button. Please subscribe. Follow me on Instagram. God, if you're not following me on Instagram, you're missing out on so much stuff. Instagram, Extreme Daily Drivers. Come on, get with it. I'll see you next time.